They made us homeless and took my sister's life. The boy's secret shocked a Hell's Angel. The gray light of 5 in the morning sat heavy over the clubhouse, the kind of light that made everything look like an old photograph. Marcus Kelly walked the gravel lot slow, like he did every morning, coffee cup warm in his hand, steam curling up into the cold air. Marcus was a big man, 45 years old, with shoulders like a doorway and a beard going gray at the edges. His leather vest hung heavy with patches earned over 25 years of riding, 20 of them as the man in charge. People called him Bear because that was what he looked like when he was angry. But at 5 in the morning, walking his lot in the quiet, he didn't look like a bear at all. He looked like a tired man who liked the silence before the world woke up. The clubhouse sat at the edge of town, a low brick building with a gravel lot out front, full of motorcycles lined up like sleeping horses. Chrome caught the first gray light. Last night there had been a chapter meeting, loud voices and cigarette smoke, and arguments about dues and runs, and 100 small things that mattered to nobody but them. Now it was still. The kind of still that Marcus had come to need, the same way some men needed their first cup of coffee. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He walked the fence line first, checking the gate like he always did, then cut across toward the back porch where the guys sat on warm nights, drinking beer and telling lies about the old days. The porch boards were gray and swollen from years of rain, and underneath them was a crawl space nobody ever used. Just dirt and old leaves and a stray cat that came and went. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and kept walking, his boots crunching soft on the gravel. The sky was turning from black to gray to the color of a dove's wing, and somewhere a bird had started up, testing its voice before the rest of the world joined in. That was when he heard it. A rustle. Quiet. But not nothing. The kind of sound a raccoon might make, except it didn't stop and start the way an animal's did. It was steady, careful, like something trying very hard not to be heard. Marcus stopped walking. He stood still and listened, head tilted, the way he used to when he rode point on a run and needed to hear trouble before he saw it. The sound came again, from under the porch. He set his coffee down on the porch rail, slow and quiet, and pulled the little flashlight off his belt, the one he carried out of habit more than need. He crouched down, knees popping, and clicked the light on, aiming it into the dark space beneath the boards. The beam cut through cobwebs and old leaves and landed on a pair of eyes. Marcus went still. A boy, small, maybe 10 years old, pressed back into the corner of the crawlspace like he was trying to become part of the dirt. His face was streaked with grime, his hair matted flat on one side like he'd been sleeping rough for a long while. His clothes hung off him, too big or too small. Hard to tell which under all the dirt. In his arms he held a backpack, clutched tight against his chest with both hands, the way a person holds something when it is the only thing left that is theirs. The boy's eyes were wide and wet and full of pure animal fear. The second the light hit him, he scrambled backward, deeper into the shadows, banging his head on a low beam and not even flinching at the pain. "Hey," Marcus said, low and quiet, the same voice he used to calm a spooked horse once at a friend's ranch. "Hey, it's all right. I ain't gonna hurt you." The boy didn't answer. He pressed himself against the cold dirt wall of the crawlspace, chest heaving, eyes locked on Marcus like he was watching a wolf get closer to a fire he couldn't put out. His knuckles had gone white around the straps of that backpack. Marcus stayed crouched where he was, flashlight steady, his own breath fogging faintly in the cold morning air, and did not move any closer. Marcus didn't move any closer. He'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose something scared was to reach for it. "Okay," he said, soft as he could make his big voice go. "Okay, we're just gonna sit here a minute." He shifted his weight off his knees and settled down onto the gravel, one hand braced on the porch post, taking his time about it like his back was stiff, which it was. He set the flashlight down beside him, angled so the light spilled sideways instead of straight into the boy's face. The kid didn't need a spotlight on him. He needed to stop feeling hunted. The boy's breath still came fast and shallow. Marcus could hear it, little puffs of fog catching the flashlight beam. His eyes never left Marcus's face, not even to blink for long. Marcus reached slow into his jacket pocket, moving like a man reaching for a wallet at a checkpoint, no sudden motions. He pulled out a granola bar, one of the cheap ones the club kept in a box by the coffee pot, and set it on the gravel between them. Not close to the boy. Not close to himself either. Right in the middle, where it would take trust from both directions to close the gap. "That's yours if you want it," Marcus said. "Nobody's gonna take it back." The boy's eyes dropped to the bar. Just for a second, but Marcus caught it. The way his throat moved when he swallowed, the way his nose twitched like a dog smelling food from a long way off. Hungry. Real hungry. But he didn't move. His arms stayed locked around that backpack like it was bolted to his ribs. Marcus stayed quiet after that. He'd found over the years that silence did more work than words most times. People filled silence with their own thoughts, and scared people usually filled it with the thought that maybe, just maybe, the quiet wasn't a trap. The bird that had been testing its voice earlier found its nerve and started up for real. A thin whistling song from somewhere in the fence line. A truck rumbled by out on the main road, engine noise rising and falling, and the boy's head snapped toward the sound so fast it looked like it hurt his neck. His whole body tensed like a rabbit ready to bolt through the far side of the crawl space and out into the field behind it. "Easy," Marcus said, not moving an inch. "That's just a truck. Ain't nobody looking for you out here." That last part seemed to land somewhere. The boy's shoulders came down a little. Not much, but a little. His eyes came back to Marcus, and this time they stayed a beat longer before flicking to the granola bar again. Minutes passed. Marcus didn't check a watch, but the sky kept lightening, gray going to that pale color right before the sun actually shows itself. His knees ached from sitting on gravel, and the cold had worked its way through his jeans, but he didn't shift, didn't sigh, didn't do anything that might read as impatience. Impatience was for men who had somewhere else to be. Marcus had nowhere else to be. Not this morning. "You don't gotta tell me nothing," Marcus said eventually. "You don't gotta come out neither, if you're not ready. I'll just sit here till you are." Something moved behind the boy's eyes at that, like the words had poked at something he wasn't expecting to hear from a stranger built like a doorway. It took a long time. Long enough that Marcus's coffee, forgotten on the porch rail, had gone stone cold. Long enough that the sun cracked the horizon and threw a thin gold line across the gravel lot. But slowly, inch by inch, the boy started to unfold from the corner of the crawl space. He moved like every joint hurt him, like his body had forgotten how to do anything but curl up small. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, dragging the backpack along the dirt in front of him, never once letting go of it. When he reached the edge of the porch, he stopped, still half in shadow, and looked up at Marcus with those wide, wet eyes. "Toby," the boy said, voice cracked and small, like it hadn't been used in days. "My name's Toby." He stayed where he was, several feet back, the backpack hugged tight to his chest, his eyes darting past Marcus toward the road, like he was already counting the steps it would take to run. "Toby," Marcus said, like he was trying the name out, making sure it fit right in his mouth. "I'm Marcus. Some folks call me Bear." He didn't reach out a hand to shake, didn't do anything that might spook the boy back into the dark. Instead, he pushed himself up off the gravel, slow and creaking, and moved to the porch steps a few feet away. He lowered himself down onto the bottom step, elbows on his knees, making himself smaller, hunching his big shoulders in, trying to look like less of a mountain and more like just a man sitting on some steps. "Come sit if you want," Marcus said. "Steps are drier than that gravel. Probably warmer too." Toby didn't move at first. His eyes flicked to the granola bar still sitting untouched in the dirt, then back to Marcus, then toward the road again, running his numbers. Doing that math-scared kids do without even knowing they're doing it. Finally, he crept forward, snatched the granola bar quick like it might vanish, and backed up to sit on the step 2 below where Marcus sat. Not close, but closer than the crawlspace. He tore the wrapper open with shaking hands and ate like he hadn't eaten in a long time. Small, fast bites, cheeks working, eyes still watching Marcus over the top of it. Marcus let him finish before he said anything else. The sun kept climbing, turning the gravel lot gold, throwing long shadows off the parked bikes lined up against the fence. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said finally. Toby's chewing slowed. He nodded, just barely. "Why's a kid like you sleeping under a place like this?" Marcus kept his voice even, no judgment in it, just a question laid out flat and honest. "This ain't exactly a safe spot for anybody. Lot of scary-looking guys come and go from here. Lot of noise, lot of engines. Why here?" Toby's jaw worked. He looked down at the empty wrapper in his hands, folding it over and over into a smaller and smaller square, like if he made it small enough it might disappear. "Nobody looks under porches," Toby said quietly. "Nobody ever thinks to look under porches." Marcus nodded slow, like that made all the sense in the world. Because it did. "You been running from somebody?" Marcus asked. "Somebody looking for you?" Toby's eyes welled up fast, so fast it looked like the question had cracked something open that had been holding steady a long time. His chin trembled. He shook his head, then nodded, then shook his head again, like he didn't know which answer was true anymore. "Not somebody bad," Toby said, voice cracking. "Just people who want to put me somewhere. A place I don't know, with people I don't know." "Foster care," Marcus said quietly. Not a question. He'd seen enough kids come through rough situations to know the shape of that fear. Toby's shoulders started shaking. The folded wrapper fell from his hands and skittered across the step. His breath came in short hitching gasps, the kind that comes right before a person loses hold of everything they've been keeping locked down. "We didn't have nowhere to go," Toby said, the words tumbling out fast now, like a dam giving way. "They kicked us out, me and my mom and my sister. Emmy, my little sister. They said we didn't pay enough, said we had to go, and we didn't have nowhere. So we lived in the car. It was so cold. It was so cold at night, and Emmy kept coughing, and my mom kept saying it was just a cold. Just a cold. But it wasn't. Tears ran down his face now, cutting clean lines through the dirt smudged there. He wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. He was looking somewhere else, somewhere back in the cold and the dark. Back in a car with fogged windows and a sister who couldn't stop shivering. She got real sick, Toby said, voice breaking apart. Real bad sick. And we didn't have no money for a doctor. We didn't have nowhere to go, and by the time my mom finally got somebody to help us, it was too late. It was too late, and He couldn't finish it straight out, his whole body curled forward, shoulders shaking, sobs tearing out of him like they'd been trapped in his chest for weeks with nowhere to go. Marcus sat still, aching to close the distance but staying put, letting the boy break in his own time, in his own space. They made us homeless, Toby choked out, the words finally ripping loose from somewhere deep and raw, and took my sister's life. Marcus let the boy cry until the worst of it passed, until the sobs turned into hiccups, and the hiccups turned into shaky breaths. He didn't say anything. Some things didn't need words laid on top of them. Sometimes a person just needed to know somebody was there while the storm went through. When Toby finally quieted, wiping his face with the back of his dirty sleeve, Marcus stood up slow. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside. Get something warm in you that ain't a granola bar." Toby hesitated, glancing toward the tree line like he was still weighing his odds of running. But something in him had shifted. Maybe it was the crying. Maybe it was just being too tired to run anymore. He grabbed his backpack, held it tight against his chest with both arms, and followed Marcus up the steps. The clubhouse door creaked open into a big room that smelled like coffee and motor oil and old wood. Diesel stood at the counter, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. Preacher sat at the long table by the window, Bible open in front of him, reading glasses pushed down his nose. Both men looked up when the door opened. Both men froze. Diesel's coffee pot hung in the air, forgotten. Preacher's hand stopped on the page he'd been about to turn. Neither of them said a word at first, just stared at the sight of Marcus standing in the doorway with a filthy, hollow-eyed kid clinging to a backpack like it was the only solid thing left in his world. "Bear," Diesel said slowly, setting the pot down. "What in the world?" "Found him under the porch," Marcus said. His voice was rough, quieter than usual. "Name's Toby. He's had a hell of a night. Hell of a lot more than a night, from the sound of it." Preacher took his glasses off entirely now, folding them and setting them on the table. His eyes moved over Toby, slow and careful, taking in the dirt, the two big clothes, the way the kid's shoulders curled in like he was trying to make himself smaller, easier to overlook. "Sit down, son," Preacher said. Voice gentle as a hand on a bruise. He pulled out the chair closest to him. "Sit right here." Toby looked to Marcus first, like he needed permission, like sitting down at a table with strangers was a decision too big to make on his own. Marcus nodded, and that seemed to be enough. Toby crept to the chair and sat, backpack still clutched against his chest, refusing to set it down even for a second. Diesel was already moving, cracking eggs into a pan like it was the most natural thing in the world, like feeding strange kids who showed up under porches was just part of a Tuesday morning. The eggs sizzled. Bread went into the toaster. Nobody talked about it. Nobody asked more questions yet. They just moved around the kitchen, giving the boy space to breathe. When the plate landed in front of Toby, eggs steaming, toast golden and buttered, his eyes went wide like he'd never seen anything so good in his whole life. He picked up the fork with a shaking hand and started eating. Slow at first, then faster, like some part of him was afraid it might get taken away. Marcus stood by the counter, watching. Diesel leaned against the stove, arms crossed, watching too, his easy grin gone soft and serious. Preacher had gone quiet, just sipping his coffee, eyes flicking between Toby and Marcus like he was piecing something together. The room stayed quiet, except for the scrape of fork against plate, the small sounds of a hungry kid trying to eat like a normal person and not quite managing it. Marcus cleared his throat. Both men looked at him. "He's staying," Marcus said. Just like that. No dressing it up, no long explanation, just laid out flat like a fact of the world. At least until I figure out what happened to him. Figure out who's supposed to be looking after him, and why they ain't. Diesel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Preacher's eyes stayed steady on Marcus, searching, but he didn't argue either. Nobody objected. Not yet. The only sound in the kitchen was Toby, quiet and exhausted, still eating like the world might end before he finished the plate. Toby had fallen asleep, sitting up, fork still loose in his hand, before he'd even finished the eggs. Diesel had caught the plate before it hit the floor, and Marcus had carried the boy to the old couch by the window himself, surprised at how light he was, how little there seemed to be of him under the two big clothes. He'd pulled a spare blanket from the hall closet, the one with the faded eagle stitched on it that nobody could remember the origin of, and laid it over the boy's shoulders. Toby hadn't stirred. He'd just curled tighter around his backpack, even in sleep, like letting go of it wasn't a thing his body knew how to do anymore. Marcus stood over him a long moment before he waved the others toward the far end of the room, away from the couch, keeping his voice low. "Kitchen," he said. Now, Diesel and Preacher followed him to the long table. Doc was already there, having wandered in sometime during breakfast, drawn by the smell of eggs and the strange quiet that had settled over the clubhouse. Doc was a wiry man, older than he looked, with careful eyes that missed nothing. 20 years out of the service, and he still moved like he was reading a room for threats. Marcus sat down heavy, rubbing a hand over his face. "Kid's name is Toby. 10 years old, near as I can tell," he said. "Family got evicted, lost their place, ended up living out of a car. He's got a sister, or he had one. Emmy, younger than him, got sick, and by the time anybody could do anything about it, it was too late. The kitchen went still. Even Diesel, who always had something to say, didn't say anything. Mom's in some kind of psychiatric hold," Marcus went on. "That's what he told me. Boy ran off rather than go into foster care. Been on his own since. God knows how long. And he ended up here," Preacher said quietly. Not a question, just laying the fact down next to the others. "Under the porch," Marcus said. "Middle of the night." Diesel shook his head slow, jaw working. 10 years old. "I want to find out what happened," Marcus said. "Who evicted them? Why nobody caught this before it went this far? I want to do this right, though, not go in guns blazing and get the boy taken somewhere worse. I want paperwork. I want to know who's responsible, and I want to know what our options are before we hand him over to strangers who don't know a damn thing about him." Preacher nodded, slow. "That's the right way to do it." "I'll make calls," Marcus said. Quiet ones. See if I can get eyes on the eviction records. See who owns the property. Somebody's name is on that paperwork somewhere. Doc had been quiet through all of it, arms crossed, watching the couch across the room where Toby slept curled up small under the blanket. Before you go making calls, Doc said, I want to look at him. Marcus looked over. He's sleeping. That's fine. I don't need him awake for what I'm looking for. Doc was already moving, careful and quiet, crossing the room like he was approaching something fragile. He crouched down next to the couch, checking the boy's color. The way his wrist looked too thin where it stuck out from his sleeve, pressing 2 fingers gentle against Toby's neck to check his pulse without waking him. Marcus watched from across the room, arms crossed tight over his chest, feeling something twist in his gut with every second that passed. Doc straightened up after a few minutes and walked back over, his face set in a way that told Marcus this wasn't good news before he even opened his mouth. He's malnourished, Doc said, keeping his voice low. Bad. Skin's too dry, his color's off, and I'd bet money he's underweight for his age by a good margin. Kid's been running on nothing for a while now. How bad? Marcus said. Not really a question. More like bracing for the answer. Bad enough he needs to see somebody today, Doc said. Real medical attention. Blood work, at least. I can only tell you so much just looking at him. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. We can't take him to a hospital without it getting flagged. Questions get asked, and next thing you know, he's in the system before I've had a chance to sort any of this out proper. I know a doctor, Doc said. Owes me a favor from a long time back. Won't ask questions he doesn't need to ask. Marcus nodded once, already reaching for his phone. The clubhouse had gone quiet by the time the sun dropped behind the trees, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long day of worry. Doc's doctor friend had come and gone, drawing blood, checking Toby's heart, writing things down on a little pad without saying much. He'd told Marcus what he needed to hear in a low voice by the door. The boy would be okay. He needed food, rest, and time, nothing broken that couldn't be fixed with care. Marcus had set Toby up in the spare room down the back hall, the one that used to belong to Preacher before he moved into the trailer out back. It had a real bed in it, a lamp that worked, curtains somebody's ex-wife had left behind years ago. Marcus had tucked the boy in himself, backpack still clutched to his chest even in sleep, and figured that would be that until morning. It wasn't. Marcus was up near midnight, sitting in the main room going over papers Preacher had printed off, when he heard it. A creak of floorboards, quick footsteps, uneven, panicked, he set the papers down and moved toward the hallway. Toby was there, sitting on the floor with his back pressed hard against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest. Backpack clutched so tight his knuckles had gone pale. His eyes were wide open, darting around the dark hallway like he didn't know where he was, like the walls themselves might be a threat. Hey, Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. Hey, it's just me. Toby flinched at the sound, sucking in a breath like he'd been caught doing something wrong. His eyes found Marcus's face in the dim hallway light, and for a second, he still looked like he might bolt. His whole body was tensed up, ready to run, feet already braced against the floor. You're okay, Marcus said. He didn't move closer. Just crouched down a few feet away, keeping himself low, keeping himself smaller. You're at the clubhouse. Remember? You had breakfast this morning, eggs. Diesel caught your plate. Toby blinked, some of the panic draining slow out of his eyes as the room came back to him. He looked down at his own hands like he was surprised to find them shaking. "I didn't know where I was," Toby whispered. His voice cracked in the middle of it. "I woke up, and it was dark, and I didn't know where I was." "That happens," Marcus said. "New place." "It's all right." Toby didn't say anything else. He just sat there, back against the wall, staring at a spot on the floor somewhere between his own feet and Marcus's boots. Marcus lowered himself down slow, easing his back against the same wall a few feet away, giving the boy space, but staying close enough that he wasn't alone anymore. He didn't say anything about going back to the room. Didn't push. Just sat there in the dim hallway, the old house creaking quiet around them, waiting. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Toby's breathing slowed, little by little, his grip on the backpack loosening just slightly, though he never once let it go all the way. "You don't have to talk," Marcus said finally, quiet, not looking at the boy directly. "Just figured I'd sit here a while. Case you wake up again." Toby glanced over at him, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then he looked back down at the floor and didn't say anything, but he didn't tell Marcus to leave either. The hallway light buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere in the clubhouse, a motorcycle engine ticked as it cooled in the garage. The house settled around them the way old houses do. Quiet pops and creaks that meant nothing at all. Marcus stayed. He didn't check his phone. He didn't get up to make coffee or check the papers waiting for him in the other room. He just sat there on the floor of the hallway next to a boy who wasn't his, who had every reason in the world not to trust anybody. And he waited. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Toby's head finally started to tip sideways, his eyes growing heavy despite himself. He fought it for a while, jerking awake every time his chin dropped, like sleep itself might be dangerous. But eventually his body won out over whatever fear was left in him. His head came to rest against Marcus's shoulder, backpack still held tight in his lap, and this time, he didn't wake back up. Marcus sat very still, not daring to move, feeling the small weight of the boy leaning into him like it was something fragile he might break if he shifted wrong. He made himself a promise, right there in that dark hallway, quiet and solid as stone. Whatever it cost him, whatever he had to do, he wasn't letting anybody hurt this boy again. Morning came in gray and slow, the kind of light that didn't seem to want to commit to being day. Marcus hadn't slept. Not really. He'd carried Toby back to bed sometime around 3. The boy limp and heavy with real sleep for the first time since Marcus had pulled him out from under the porch. He'd stood in the doorway a long minute after, watching the small chest rise and fall, before he finally let himself walk away. By 6, he was in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and by 7, he was on the phone. Marcus Kelly hadn't run a legitimate business in his life. Not the kind with a storefront and a tax number anyway, but 25 years of running a motorcycle club had taught him plenty about paperwork, about permits and liens and the slow grinding machine of local government. More than that, it had taught him people. Everybody owed somebody a favor, and Marcus had spent 2 decades collecting favors like other men collected coins. He called Sully first, an old prospect who'd gone straight and now worked in the county clerk's office. Sully owed him for a night 11 years back that neither of them talked about anymore. A night that had kept Sully out of a prison cell. Marcus never brought it up. He didn't need to. "I need eviction paperwork," Marcus said, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't carry down the hall. Family got put out over on Miller Street. Names Reyes. Kids' names Toby. Sully was quiet on the other end for a second. That the kid staying with you? Heard about that. Word travels fast. You know how it is. Give me the address, I'll see what I can pull. Marcus gave him what little he had, an old motel address, a car that had been their last known home. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Sully to run down the property management company that had filed the notice. By 9, Marcus had a name. Coastal Property Group. By 9:30, he had a number for their office, and a woman on the other end named Denise who sounded like she'd rather be doing anything else with her Tuesday morning than talking to a man with a voice like gravel asking about old eviction files. I need the paperwork on a property, Marcus said. Corner of Miller and 5th. Motel unit. Back in the fall. Sir, I can't just release tenant files to. I'm not asking for tenant files. I'm asking for the eviction notice. That's public record. And you know it. Marcus kept his voice even, patient, the same voice he used talking down a hothead prospect who wanted to start something at a bar. You can send it over, or I can have somebody with a badge ask you the same question. Your call. There was a long pause, papers shuffling somewhere on the other end. Fax number? Marcus gave her the clubhouse fax, an old machine that sat gathering dust in the back office, mostly used for insurance forms and the occasional court document. He hung up and stood there a minute, staring at the phone in his hand like it might tell him something else. Down the hall, he could hear Diesel's laugh booming through the kitchen, and under it, quieter, something that might have been Toby laughing too. Small, rusty, like a sound the boy hadn't used in a long time and wasn't sure he remembered how to make right. Marcus let himself smile at that, just for a second, before he walked back to the office to wait. It took 40 minutes. The fax machine groaned to life around 10:15, clicking and whirring the way it always did, spitting out a single page slow enough that Marcus stood over it, arms crossed, watching it inch out like the machine itself was reluctant to hand over what it knew. He picked it up before it had even fully dropped into the tray. The notice was standard, boilerplate language about unpaid rent, about 30-day notices, about a family's belongings being placed on the curb if not retrieved within a certain window. Marcus had seen 100 like it over the years, had helped more than one brother's family fight one off. His eyes moved down to the bottom of the page, to the signature line, already forming the shape of a name in his head that he intended to hunt down and make understand exactly what he thought of a man who could do this to 2 kids. The name stopped him cold. Richard Kelly. Marcus stood there in the quiet office, the fax machine still humming behind him, staring at his brother's signature like it might rearrange itself into something else if he looked long enough. It didn't. The paper stayed on the desk for a long time before Marcus could make himself sit down. He lowered himself into the old office chair, the one with the busted spring that poked his hip if he leaned too far right, and he set the fax down in front of him like it was something that might bite. Richard Kelly. 20 years since he'd said that name out loud to anyone. The office window let in a thin bar of gray light, and dust hung in it, turning slow. Marcus stared at nothing for a while. And then, because there was nothing else to do, he let himself remember. Their father had been a hard man, but not a cruel one. Frank Kelly had built up a handful of rental properties over 30 years, buying up old houses nobody else wanted, fixing them with his own 2 hands, renting them cheap to families who needed a break. He never got rich off it. That wasn't the point. Marcus could still see him, boots caked in plaster dust, telling some young mother on Ashford Street she didn't need to worry about this month's rent, that they'd figure it out when things got easier. Frank Kelly believed a roof over a kid's head mattered more than a number in a ledger. Marcus had believed that too, once, so had Richard. Or at least Marcus had thought so. Then their father got sick. And the sickness didn't take long, and after the funeral there had been a lawyer and a folder and a conversation at their father's kitchen table that Marcus still felt in his chest sometimes. Like a bruise that never fully faded. Richard had wanted to sell. Said the properties were bleeding money. Said their father had been running a charity, not a business. Said it was time to do things different. Marcus had wanted to keep going the way their father had, families first, profit second. They'd split it, in the end, the way brothers do when neither one will bend. Richard took the West Side properties. Marcus took what was left, which wasn't much, and lost most of it within a few years anyway, because Marcus Kelly had never been much of a businessman. He'd just been a man trying to keep his father's word. He hadn't spoken to Richard since the day they signed the papers. Hadn't gone to his wedding if there'd been one. Didn't know if Richard had kids, or a dog, or a house with a pool. Just knew that somewhere along the way, his brother had turned into Coastal Property Group, into a man who signed his name to a piece of paper that put 2 children out into the cold. Marcus rubbed a hand down his face, feeling every one of his 45 years in the gesture. He thought about driving straight to whatever office building his brother sat in now. Thought about what he'd say. Thought about how satisfying it might feel to grab Richard by the collar of some expensive shirt and ask him if he still remembered their father's voice. The one that used to say a family's roof wasn't a business decision. He thought about all of it, turning it over like a stone in his hand, and then he set it down. Because down the hall he could hear something that mattered more right now. Toby's rusty little laugh, again, drifting from the kitchen. Marcus stood up and folded the fax in half, then in half again, and slid it into the drawer of the desk, out of sight. Whatever he was going to do about Richard, it could wait. It had waited 20 years already. It could wait one more day. But Toby couldn't wait. Toby needed steady ground under his feet, not another shock, not another reason to think the world was made of people who'd let him down. If the boy found out that the man who'd put him and his sister out in the cold shared blood with the man now trying to keep him safe, Marcus didn't know what that would do to him. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. He wasn't willing to risk it. Not yet. Not while the trust between them still felt as thin and fresh as new ice on a pond. He picked up the phone again, and this time when he dialed, his voice came out steadier. "Doc," he said, "I need you to set something up. Full workup, blood work, whatever you can manage without raising flags. Kid needs to see somebody proper tomorrow. I want it done right." The clinic smelled like hand sanitizer and old coffee, and Toby sat on the edge of the exam table with his sneakers dangling, not quite touching the floor. He had his backpack pulled up over both shoulders, straps tight, like somebody might try to peel it off him if he wasn't careful. "You don't gotta hold that so tight, kid," Doc said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "Nobody's taking it from you." Toby didn't loosen his grip. But he didn't say anything either, which Marcus had learned by now was about as close to trust as the boy got on a first try. The doctor who came in was a woman named Dr. Alvarez, maybe 50, with kind eyes and gray running through her dark hair. She had a soft voice, the kind that didn't spook a person, and she crouched down to Toby's eye level before she did anything else. "Hi there," she said. "I hear your name's Toby. I'm just gonna look you over, okay? Nothing that hurts. You tell me if anything feels wrong and we stop." "Deal." Toby glanced at Marcus first. Marcus gave him a small nod, the kind that said, "I'm right here." Only then did Toby nod back at the doctor. "Deal," he said quietly. She checked his eyes, his ears, listened to his heart and lungs with the stethoscope, and Toby held so still through all of it that Marcus's chest ached watching him. Like the boy had learned somewhere that being still and quiet was the safest thing a kid could be. Then she took his hands. She turned them over gently, looking at his fingers, and Marcus saw her face change. Just slightly. Professional, but something moved behind her eyes. "Toby," she said, "can you tell me if your fingers ever hurt? Like a burning feeling or numbness?" Toby shrugged. "Sometimes. Not really anymore." "How long were you out in the cold, sweetheart? Before you came here?" Toby's eyes dropped to his lap. "I don't know. A long time. We slept in the car mostly." Dr. Alvarez nodded slowly and didn't push. She finished the exam, checked his weight, checked a few other things, and then she stepped out into the hallway with Marcus and Doc, while a nurse stayed with Toby, showing him how the little rolling stool spun in circles, which got the first real giggle out of him all morning. "He's malnourished," Dr. Alvarez said, keeping her voice low. "Not severely, but it's there. Ribs are more visible than they should be for a kid his age, and those marks on his fingers, that's mild frostbite scarring. Old. It healed. But it happened, and it happened more than once, from the pattern of it." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Doc put a hand on his shoulder, steady, the way he did when he could tell a man was about to go somewhere dark in his head. "He's going to be okay," Doc said quietly. "He's tough. And he's got good food and warm beds now." Doctor Alvarez gave Marcus a look that was somewhere between sympathy and respect. "Whoever's taking care of him now," she said, "keep doing what you're doing. Kids like this, what they need most isn't a fix. It's consistency. Somebody who doesn't disappear." Marcus nodded, throat tight, and didn't trust himself to say much more than "yes, ma'am." The ride back to the clubhouse was quiet. Toby sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, backpack in his lap, watching the buildings slide by outside the window. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and let the silence sit, because he'd learned that Toby talked more when nobody was hunting for words out of him. Sure enough, a few minutes from the clubhouse, Toby spoke without turning his head. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "For running away before? From the shelter place?" Marcus glanced over at him. The boy's voice was small, careful, like he was bracing for the answer to hurt. "No," Marcus said. "You're not in trouble." Toby picked at a loose thread on his backpack strap. "Everybody always says that, and then they still send you somewhere else." Marcus pulled up to a red light and turned to look at him fully. "I'm not everybody, Toby. Look at me." Toby looked. "I'm not sending you anywhere," Marcus said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to, thick with something he didn't usually let show. "You're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. You hear me?" Toby's chin trembled, just slightly, and he nodded, fast, like he was afraid if he waited too long the words might not be true anymore. "Okay," he whispered. The light turned green, and Marcus drove on, and Toby's shoulders, for the first time in a long time, looked just a little less braced against the world. 3 days later, Marcus sat in the clubhouse office with a phone pressed to his ear, feeling more nervous than he had in years. The number belonged to a social worker named Grace Nguyen, someone Preacher knew through a church program that helped struggling families. Marcus had put off making this call as long as he could stand. "This is Grace," a voice answered. Marcus cleared his throat. "Ma'am, my name's Marcus Kelly. I got a situation I need help with. There's a kid staying with me, 10 years old. His family fell apart, and I don't want him disappearing into some system that's gonna lose track of him. I want to do this the right way." There was a pause on the other end. "Can you tell me more?" Marcus told her everything. The porch, the granola bar, the eviction, the sister who died, the mother in the hospital. He didn't leave anything out, even the parts that made him look like a man who'd made a reckless decision keeping a boy at a biker clubhouse instead of calling someone sooner. Grace listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I need to come see him. Today, if possible." "Today's fine," Marcus said, and meant it. She showed up that afternoon in a gray sedan that looked out of place among the motorcycles lined up in the gravel lot. She was a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, wearing a blazer like armor, and Marcus watched her take in the clubhouse. The patches on jackets hanging by the door, the tattoos on the men drinking coffee on the porch. Her face didn't show much, but Marcus could tell she was cataloging every single detail. "Mr. Kelly," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Grace Nguyen. Let's talk somewhere private first, and then I'd like to observe Toby if that's all right. Just to see how he's doing in this environment." "Fair enough," Marcus said. They talked in the office for 20 minutes. Grace asked hard questions about his record, about the club, about whether he understood the weight of what he was asking for. Marcus answered every one straight, no dodging, no excuses. When she asked why he wanted to do this, he said the truth. Because nobody else was gonna. And that kid's been let down enough. Grace studied him a long moment, then nodded once. "Show me the garage." They walked out back where Diesel had the bay doors open, sunlight spilling across the concrete floor. Toby stood next to him at the workbench, sleeves pushed up, a smudge of grease on his cheek like a badge of honor. Diesel was showing him how to use a torque wrench, his big hands guiding Toby's smaller ones. "Nah. Easy. Easy," Diesel said, laughing. "You ain't trying to break it, kid. You're trying to tighten it." Toby grinned, actually grinned, wide and easy, nothing like the guarded boy Marcus had pulled out from under the porch. "Like this? Perfect. You're a natural." Diesel ruffled his hair, and Toby didn't flinch away from the touch. He leaned into it, just slightly, the way a kid does with someone he trusts. Grace stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching without saying a word. Marcus stayed quiet beside her, letting her see it for herself instead of trying to convince her with talk. Toby noticed them and waved a wrench in the air. "Marcus. Look, I'm helping." "I see that," Marcus called back, and something in his chest loosened at the easy way Toby used his name now, no hesitation in it, at all. Grace watched a few minutes longer. She watched Toby laugh at something Diesel said. She watched him hand over a tool without being asked, already knowing which one Diesel needed next. She watched the boy's shoulders, loose and unguarded, nothing like the file photo she'd been sent from the shelter intake. Finally, she turned to Marcus. "I came here expecting to find a kid being kept somewhere unsafe," she said. I've seen unsafe. This isn't that. Marcus held his breath. He's thriving, Grace said. I don't say that lightly. I've seen kids in perfect houses with white picket fences who don't look half this settled. She glanced back at Toby, who was now proudly holding up a bolt like he'd found treasure. I'm not going to put him in the system, Mr. Kelly. I'll help you file for emergency guardianship. We'll do this properly, paperwork and all, but I'll fight for this placement. He belongs here. The following week, the paperwork sat in a folder on Marcus's desk, thick with signatures and stamps that made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. Grace called twice to check on filing dates. Marcus answered every call standing up straight, like she could see him through the phone. Toby didn't know about most of it. He knew there was paperwork, sure, but he didn't know the words emergency guardianship or understand what they meant for his whole life. What he knew was that he had a bed, and breakfast every morning, and Diesel let him hold the good wrenches now, the ones with the rubber grips. It was Preacher's idea to make it official in a different way. Something a 10-year-old could actually understand. Paper's fine, Preacher said one evening, leaning against the porch rail with his coffee. But a boy needs to feel it, not just read it. Marcus looked at him. Feel what? That he's one of us. So, they got to work. Doc knew a leather guy 2 towns over who owed him a favor from years back, something about a motorcycle accident and a debt never quite settled. Diesel drove out and came back with a small leather vest, kid-sized, soft at the seams like it had been broken in already, even though it was brand new. Marcus took it to the back room where the club kept its patches, the same room where new members earned their colors after years of proving themselves. He picked one out himself. Not the full colors, nothing that meant more than it should. Just a small patch, round and stitched clean, that said Little Brother in curling letters. He stitched it on himself, hands slow and careful, working the needle the way his own father had taught him decades ago, fixing torn jackets on a workbench that didn't exist anymore. They gave it to Toby on a Thursday, right before dinner. The whole club gathered in the main room, standing around the long table where they usually ate, all of them trying to look casual, and none of them managing it. Diesel had a grin plastered across his face he couldn't hide. Doc stood with his arms crossed, and Preacher held the vest behind his back like a kid at Christmas. Got something for you, Marcus said, nodding at Preacher. Toby looked around at all of them, confused. What is it? Preacher pulled the vest out and held it up. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't awkward, just full. Toby's eyes went wide. He didn't move for a second, just stared at it like he thought it might not be real, like it might be for some other kid in some other story. Go on, Diesel said, nudging him. It ain't gonna bite. Toby took it slow, running his fingers over the leather, then over the patch. He read the words twice, lips moving without sound. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling too, that same wide grin from the garage. For me? For you, Marcus said. You're part of this now, not just staying here. Part of it. Toby pulled it on right there, over his t-shirt, and it fit almost perfect. Just a little roomy in the shoulders, room to grow into it. He stood up straighter without seeming to notice he was doing it. Well, Diesel said. Let's see it. Toby turned around slow, showing off the patch on the back, and the whole room broke into noise, whooping and clapping like he'd just won something important. Toby laughed. Actually laughed. A real laugh that came from somewhere deep, somewhere that hadn't been used in a long time. That night at dinner, Toby wouldn't take the vest off, not even to eat. He sat at the long table between Diesel and Doc, sleeves pushed up just like he'd seen the men do, cutting his chicken like it was the finest meal he'd ever had, even though it was just the same stew Doc always made on Thursdays. He told a joke, something about a bolt and a wrench that didn't quite land right. The punchline scrambled. But the whole table laughed anyway, loud and warm, and Toby laughed hardest of all. His whole face lit up in a way Marcus hadn't seen since the day under the porch. Marcus sat at the head of the table, watching him, feeling something settle into his chest that he didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt like pride and fear and love all tangled together. He watched Toby laugh, watched the boy reach for another roll without asking permission first, like he finally believed there'd be enough. Marcus picked up his fork and didn't say anything. He just watched and let the warmth sit there, unfamiliar but welcome, like a jacket that finally fit right. The garage smelled like oil and metal, the good kind of smell that meant work was getting done. Sunlight came in through the big open door in long yellow strips, catching all the dust floating in the air. Diesel had an old engine spread out across his workbench, pieces of it laid out like puzzle parts, and Toby stood right next to him, handing over tools before Diesel even had to ask for them. 10 millimeter, Diesel said, holding out his hand without looking up. Toby dug through the toolbox and found it fast. He'd learned the sizes now, could tell them apart just by looking, something that had taken him only a few days to pick up. He slapped it into Diesel's palm like they'd done this 100 times. "Good man," Diesel said. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them work. He'd come out to grab a rag and ended up staying, the way he sometimes did now, just to watch the boy move around the garage like he belonged there. And he did belong there. That much was clear. But Marcus's eyes kept drifting to the corner, to the backpack sitting on top of an old crate, right where Toby could see it from wherever he stood. It never left his sight. Not once. Marcus had noticed it that first week. How Toby carried it everywhere. How it sat next to his bed every night like a second pillow. How his hand would drift down to touch it sometimes, without him even realizing he was doing it. Marcus waited until Diesel sent Toby off for a different wrench, some errand that gave him a minute alone with the boy. "Toby," Marcus said, keeping his voice easy, the same voice he used when he didn't want to spook a nervous dog. "Come here a second." Toby walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans, a smudge of grease already on his cheek. "Yeah?" Marcus crouched down so he was closer to eye level, something he'd started doing without thinking about it too much. He nodded toward the backpack on the crate. "You've had that thing with you every day since I found you under the porch. Sleep with it, eat with it close by, bring it out here even though there's nothing you need from it in a garage." Toby's face changed, just slightly. The easy smile from a second ago tightened up at the corners. "I like having it around." "I get that," Marcus said. He kept his tone soft, careful, just wondering what's in there. "You don't gotta tell me if you don't want. Just curious." Toby glanced over at the backpack, then back at Marcus, then down at his own hands. His fingers picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "It's Emmy's," Toby said. The words came out quiet, almost too quiet to catch over the sound of Diesel banging around on the other side of the garage. Marcus didn't say anything right away. He just watched the way Toby's shoulders had gone stiff, the way his jaw had set like a door closing. "Okay," Marcus said gently. Toby looked up at him fast, like he was waiting for more questions, like he'd built up a wall already just in case. But Marcus didn't push. He'd learned that much in the last week, that pushing a kid like Toby only made him run faster in the other direction. "Hey," Toby said suddenly, his voice brighter, forced but trying hard to sound normal. "Did you know Diesel says I can help him change the oil next time? Says I'm getting good at handing him stuff without him even asking." "That's so," Marcus said, letting the subject drop even though it sat heavy in his chest. "Yeah, he says I got good hands for it, like I could be a real mechanic someday." Toby's words came faster now, tumbling over each other, the way kids talked when they wanted to steer away from something. "Can I go help him with the oil now?" He said maybe today. "Go on," Marcus said, standing back up, his knees popping a little the way they always did now. Toby jogged back over to Diesel's side, grabbing a rag off the workbench and getting back to work like nothing had happened at all. Marcus watched him go. Watched the way his hand brushed the top of the backpack on his way past, just barely, just enough to know it was still there. Marcus stayed by the door a while longer, rag still in his hand, saying nothing. The office building sat downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that smelled like carpet cleaner and money. Marcus parked his bike right out front, ignoring the sign that said motorcycles were not permitted in the visitor spaces. He didn't care. He'd spent 20 years not caring what Richard's world thought of him. And today wasn't the day to start. He pushed through the glass doors, and the woman at the front desk looked up, her eyes widening just a little at the sight of him. Leather vest, patches, a beard that hadn't seen a trim in months. He didn't fit here, and he knew it. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice careful. "I'm here to see Richard Kelly," Marcus said. "Tell him it's his brother." Her mouth opened like she wanted to ask more questions, but something in his face must have told her not to bother. She picked up the phone, said a few quiet words, and pointed him toward the elevator. "Third floor. His assistant will meet you." Marcus didn't wait for an assistant. He found the office himself, walked past a young man who tried to stand up and say something, and pushed open the door marked with his brother's name in gold letters. Richard was behind a big desk, papers spread out in front of him, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked older than Marcus remembered, grayer around the temples, but the eyes were the same. Sharp, careful, calculating even now, in the middle of a phone call, like he was already 3 steps ahead of whatever was about to happen. Richard's eyes landed on Marcus, and something flickered there, surprise maybe, or something closer to dread. He held up a finger, finished his call in a clipped voice, and set the phone down slow. "Marcus," he said. "Been a long time." 20 years, Marcus said. He didn't sit down. He stood in front of the desk like a wall. Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call. You know why I'm here." "I've got a feeling," Richard said. "The Reyes case. Word travels fast in property management circles. Guess I shouldn't be surprised my own brother's mixed up in it somehow." "There's a little boy," Marcus said, his voice low and hard. 10 years old. He was living under my porch, Richard in the dirt. Because you tossed his family out into the cold." Richard's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even, smooth, the voice of a man used to explaining away hard things. That property was 2 months behind on rent. 6 months, actually, if you count the partial payments that never cleared. I run a business, not a charity. His sister died, Marcus said. She got sick in that car they were living in. By the time anybody could help her, it was too late. Something crossed Richard's face then. Quick. Gone, before it could settle. But his voice didn't change. That's a tragedy. I won't pretend it isn't. But that's not on me. I didn't make them live in a car. I gave them notice. Same as I give everybody notice. What they did after that isn't my responsibility. Not your responsibility, Marcus repeated, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. You signed the eviction. Your name's on the paper. A little girl is dead, Richard, and you're sitting there telling me it's not your responsibility. Richard stood up now, buttoning his jacket, some old habit of composure. It's business, Marcus. I know that's hard for you to understand, living the way you live. But businesses have rules. Tenants have obligations. I can't run a company on sympathy. You could have given them time. I give everyone the same amount of time. That's called being fair. Marcus felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, felt the old anger from 20 years ago rising up fresh, like no time had passed at all. Dad would be ashamed of you. Richard's face went cold at that, the first real crack in his composure. Don't bring him into this. You don't get to play that card. You left. You walked away from everything, the business, the family, all of it, and you rode off on that bike of yours like none of us mattered. Don't stand there and lecture me about what Dad would think. I'm taking that boy in, Marcus said. I'm becoming his guardian. And I swear to you, Richard, you will never come near him. Not while I'm breathing. Richard's mouth pressed into a thin line. Do what you want. Just keep my name out of it. Marcus turned and walked out without another word, the door swinging shut hard behind him. The courthouse downtown had tall white pillars out front, the kind of building that made people nervous just by looking at it. Marcus stood on the steps in the only suit he owned, the collar too tight around his neck, feeling like a man playing dress-up in someone else's life. You look like you're about to walk into a firefight, Diesel said, adjusting his own borrowed tie for the third time. Even he had cleaned up for the day, hair combed back, boots polished instead of scuffed. Behind him, Preacher and Doc stood quiet and steady, both wearing the closest thing to church clothes they owned. Feels like one, Marcus muttered. Grace met them at the door, a folder tucked under her arm, her smile calm and sure. You ready? No, Marcus said honestly. But we're doing it anyway. Toby stood beside him, small in his own new shirt, hair combed flat, sneakers tied tight. He'd grown some in the past 2 weeks, not just in height, but in the way he held himself. He didn't flinch anymore when someone raised their voice across a room. He didn't check the door every 5 minutes, like he was waiting to run. But right now, walking up those big white steps, some of that old fear crept back into his eyes. Marcus crouched down in front of him, right there on the steps, not caring who saw. Whatever happens in there, he said, you're not going anywhere without me. You hear that? Toby nodded, but his hands found the straps of his backpack anyway, holding on tight, an old habit that hadn't fully let go. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Marcus expected, wood paneled and quiet, the kind of quiet that made every cough sound like thunder. The judge was a woman with silver hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose, her face unreadable as she flipped through the folder in front of her. This is an unusual petition, the judge said, looking up over her glasses. A motorcycle club serving as guardian to a minor child is not something I see often, Mr. Kelly. No, ma'am, Marcus said. I don't imagine it is. Grace stood up smooth and confident, her voice carrying easy through the room. Your Honor, if I may. I've been the assigned caseworker since Toby was found. In 2 weeks, I have watched this child transform. He has gained weight, he is sleeping through the night, he is engaging socially for the first time since his sister's death. The environment Mr. Kelly has provided, unconventional as it may look on paper, has been nothing short of remarkable. The judge glanced down at a page in the folder. I see here the eviction records list a Kelly Property Management as the responsible party for the family's displacement. Her eyes flicked up briefly. Any relation, Mr. Kelly? The room went still. Marcus felt his stomach drop, but he kept his voice steady. That's a conversation for another day, Your Honor. Today's about Toby. The judge held his gaze a long moment, then nodded slow, letting it go for now. Fair enough. Grace continued, sliding photographs across the desk, Toby laughing at the clubhouse table, Toby standing proud beside Diesel with a wrench in his small hand, Toby asleep peaceful in a real bed with clean sheets. I have never seen a child recover this quickly from this level of trauma, Grace said. Whatever concerns anyone might have about the setting, the results speak for themselves. The judge looked over the photos slow, one at a time, her face softening just slightly at the corners. Then, she looked at Toby directly, her voice gentler now. Toby, do you feel safe where you're living? Toby's voice came out small, but steady. Safest I've ever felt. The judge studied him a moment longer, then looked to Marcus. Mr. Kelly, I want to be clear. This court does not grant guardianship based on sentiment. It grants guardianship based on the well-being of the child. She paused, flipping the folder closed. But in this case, the evidence is hard to argue with. She reached for her gavel. This court grants emergency guardianship of Toby to Marcus Kelly, effective immediately, pending full review in 90 days. The gavel came down with a soft crack, and for 1 second, the room stayed silent, everyone holding their breath together. Then Diesel let out a whoop he couldn't hold back, and Doc clapped him on the shoulder, and Preacher bowed his head with a quiet smile, murmuring something that sounded like thanks. Grace laughed, relief washing over her face. Toby looked up at Marcus, eyes wide and shining, like he wasn't sure it was real. Marcus knelt down and pulled him into a hug right there in the courtroom, not caring one bit who was watching. The sun was still hanging low and orange over the clubhouse when the smell of charcoal smoke started drifting across the gravel lot. Doc had the grill going, flipping burgers with a spatula that had seen better decades, and Preacher was setting out paper plates like it was the most important job in the world. Someone had strung old string lights between 2 posts, the kind that blinked yellow and never all worked at the same time. But nobody cared. Music thumped low out of a speaker, balanced on a stack of tires, something with a good beat that made the whole gravel lot feel alive. Toby sat on the tailgate of Diesel's truck, a paper plate balanced on his knees, a burger in his hands that was bigger than his face. Ketchup had already found its way to his chin, but he didn't wipe it off. He was too busy laughing. Tell him again, Diesel said, nudging Marcus with his elbow. Tell him what the judge said about the club. Marcus, still in his dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up now, the tie long gone, shook his head. I'm not doing the voice. Come on, Bear, do the voice. This court does not grant guardianship based on sentiment, Marcus said in a flat, serious tone, and Toby burst out laughing so hard he nearly dropped his burger, ketchup and all. You sound nothing like her, Toby said, grinning wide. The kind of grin that showed all his teeth. I sound exactly like her. You sound like Doc when he's mad about someone touching his tools. Doc, from over by the grill, called out, because nobody should touch my tools, and the whole lot laughed together, loud and easy, the sound rolling out over the gravel and into the evening air. One by one, engines started roaring to life around the lot. Diesel's bike first, then Preacher's, then 2 or 3 others, until the whole yard filled with the deep rumbling growl of chrome and steel. It used to be a sound that made people cross the street. Tonight it sounded like celebration, like joy, like 100 small explosions of happiness let loose all at once. Toby covered his ears and laughed anyway, bouncing a little on the tailgate, his sneakers kicking against the metal. Marcus stood back a moment, just watching the boy who had been trembling under the porch 2 weeks ago, now laughing free and loud under string lights, surrounded by men who had rearranged their whole lives around keeping him safe. Something in Marcus's chest loosened. A knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years finally letting go. The party ran late, plates piling up, stories getting louder, Diesel attempting and failing to teach Toby how to whistle with 2 fingers in his mouth. By the time the string lights flickered off one by one and the last engine went quiet, Toby's eyes were heavy, his laughter turning into yawns he tried to hide behind his hand. Bedtime, Marcus said, scooping him up despite Toby's weak protest that he wasn't tired at all. Inside, the clubhouse was quiet now, the noise of the party fading into the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the old floorboards. Marcus carried Toby down the hall to his room, the one with the small bed and the patchwork quilt Preacher's wife had sent over without being asked. He set him down gentle, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Toby's eyes were barely open, his breathing slow and even, the exhaustion of a full day finally catching up to him. Get some sleep, Marcus said quietly, reaching over to turn off the lamp. Toby's hand found the strap of his backpack on the floor beside the bed, an old habit, before his fingers went still and his eyes closed all the way. Night, Marcus, he mumbled, voice thick with sleep, barely more than a whisper. Marcus froze there in the doorway a moment, hand still on the light switch. It wasn't Dad. Not yet. But it was close, closer than anything had been in 20 years, and it landed somewhere deep in his chest, and stayed there. He stood in the dark hallway a long moment, listening to the boy breathe steady and slow, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Kelly felt something that could only be called whole. Richard Kelly sat behind his desk on the 14th floor, looking out at the city through glass so clean it seemed like there was nothing there at all. His office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft clicking of his assistant's keyboard through the half-open door. On his desk sat a manila folder, thin but heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper. Inside it was a name he hadn't expected to see again. Marcus Kelly. Guardian of one Tobias Reyes, age 10. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Denise Holloway, had brought it to him that morning like she was handing over a live wire. "You'll want to see this," she'd said, and dropped the folder on his desk without another word. Richard had read it twice, Then a third time, just to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. The Reyes case. The eviction from the Sycamore Court Apartments, one of 9 properties his company managed, the file closed and forgotten months ago as far as he was concerned. Just numbers on a spreadsheet. Late payments, notices, a lockout. Done. He hadn't thought about it since. Until now, when it came back wearing his own brother's name. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing a hand down his face. He hadn't spoken to Marcus in 20 years. Not since their father's funeral, not since the will was read and the properties were split and Richard chose to sell his half of the old man's rundown buildings for cash instead of holding on to what their father had built with his hands. Marcus had called him a coward that day, said he was spitting on everything Dad stood for. Richard had told him that sentiment didn't pay bills, and that had been that. 20 years of silence, broken only by the occasional Christmas card that stopped coming after the first 5. And now here they were again, tangled together over some kid Richard had never met and a family he'd evicted without a second thought. "This is bad," Denise said, standing in the doorway now, arms crossed. "If word gets out that a child was left homeless because of one of our evictions, and the child's own uncle happens to run a motorcycle gang and is now the one raising him, the press is going to have a field day. Slumlord's eviction sends child to live with outlaw biker uncle." Can you imagine the headline? Richard closed his eyes. He could imagine it just fine. He could see the article already, the comment sections, the calls from investors nervous about their names being tied to negative press. His company had spent years building a clean reputation, glossy brochures, ribbon cuttings, charity golf tournaments. All of it could crumble under one bad news cycle. There's also the girl, Denise added carefully, flipping through her own copy of the file. The younger sister. She passed away not long after the eviction. Some kind of untreated illness. If that gets connected to the story. Richard's stomach turned, though he told himself it was only about the liability, only about the company, only about what it would cost him. "Get ahead of it," he said, voice flatter than he meant it to sound. "Challenge the guardianship. Marcus has a record. Assault charges from years back, some kind of disorderly conduct, God knows what else. And that club he runs, it's not exactly a picture of stability for a child. If we can show the court he's unfit, the story shifts. It's not about us evicting a family. It's about a troubled man trying to raise a kid he has no business raising." Denise studied him for a long moment, longer than Richard was comfortable with. "You're sure about this? He's your brother." "He hasn't been my brother in 20 years, Richard said, and the words came out sharper than he intended, like a blade turned inward as much as outward. "Draft the letter. Send it certified. I want it done by the end of the week." Denise nodded once and left without another word, her heels clicking down the hallway until the sound faded into nothing. Richard sat alone at his desk a long while after that, staring at the folder, at Marcus's name typed in plain black ink. He told himself it was business. He told himself it had nothing to do with old wounds or a father's dying wish or 20 years of silence sitting like a stone in his chest. He told himself a lot of things. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at the clubhouse, thick with legal language and cold, careful threats, and the celebration that had filled the gravel lot with laughter and string lights and the roar of engines fell suddenly, completely silent. The morning after the letter came, the clubhouse was quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. No bacon sizzling on the griddle. No radio playing old rock songs while Diesel banged around looking for coffee filters. Just gray light coming through the windows and the smell of yesterday's fire still hanging in the air. Toby woke up early, before the sun had fully climbed over the trees outside. He'd gotten used to sleeping in a real bed now, but old habits die hard, and his body still woke him at the first hint of light. The way it used to when he and Emmy slept in the car and he had to check if she was breathing. He lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clubhouse settle around him. Then he heard Marcus's voice, low and tight, coming from the room down the hall. The office, Marcus called it, though it was really just a back room with a desk and a filing cabinet and a picture of an old Harley on the wall. Toby slid out of bed. He didn't mean to listen. He told himself that later, over and over, like it might change what happened. But his feet carried him to the hallway anyway, bare and quiet on the cold wood floor, and he stopped just outside the office door, which was open a crack. "I don't care what he thinks he's got," Marcus was saying, his voice rougher than Toby had ever heard it. "That kid has a home here, a real one." There was a pause. Toby pressed himself against the wall, his heart starting to beat faster. "I know what my record says," Marcus went on. "I know exactly what's on it. That doesn't mean I'm gonna let some lawyer decide what's best for him from behind a desk he's never once gotten up from to actually look at that boy's face." Another pause. Longer this time. Toby's hands were shaking now, and he didn't know why, not exactly, except that something in Marcus's voice sounded like fear, and Marcus never sounded afraid. Yeah, I heard you the first time. Unfit. That's the word they're using." Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it hurt coming out. "They want to take him away, Sam. That's what this is. Doesn't matter how they dress it up in fancy words. That's what it comes down to." The words hit Toby like a fist to the chest. Take him away. He didn't hear the rest. He didn't need to. His whole body went cold, colder than any night he'd spent in the back seat of that car with Emmy curled up beside him, colder than the floor of the shelter they'd slept in for 2 nights before they got kicked out of there, too. Unfit. Take him away. The words echoed in his head, bouncing around until they didn't even sound like words anymore, just noise. Just the sound of the ground opening up beneath him again. He'd heard this before. Not these exact words, but the shape of them. The sound of adults deciding things about him in another room, deciding where he'd go and who he'd be with, like he was a package to be shipped somewhere else. It had happened with the shelter workers. It had almost happened with the woman from social services who kept asking him questions with a clipboard in her hand while Emmy got sicker and sicker in the back of the car. He thought he was safe here. He thought this was the place where nobody would send him away. Marcus had promised. The whole club had promised, in their own way, with burgers and leather vests and Diesel teaching him how to hold a wrench the right way. He'd let himself believe it. He'd let himself believe he could stop running. But here it was again. The same old story, just with new voices saying the same old thing. Toby backed away from the door slowly, his bare feet silent on the floor, his breath coming in short little gasps he tried to keep quiet. He didn't wait to hear anything else. He didn't need to. In his mind, it was already decided. They were going to take him away, just like they'd taken his mother away, just like they'd taken Emmy. He crept back to his room, moving fast now, pulling on his shoes with shaking hands. He grabbed the backpack from where it sat at the foot of his bed, the same one he never let out of his sight, and slung it over his shoulder like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The clubhouse was still quiet, still gray with early morning light. Everyone either asleep or distracted by their own version of the storm that had rolled in with that certified letter. Nobody heard the back door creak open. Nobody saw a small shape slip out into the cold morning air, backpack clutched tight against his chest, running before the sun was even all the way up. Marcus set the phone down harder than he meant to. The plastic cracked against the desk, and he sat there for a second, staring at nothing, his jaw tight enough to ache. Fear, he muttered to himself. Sam, we'll figure it out. But the lawyer had already hung up. He rubbed his hands over his face, feeling every one of his 45 years pressing down on him at once. Outside the office window, the sky had gone from gray to a pale, watery blue. Morning was coming whether he was ready for it or not. He needed to see Toby. Needed to look at that kid's face and remember why all of this mattered. Why he was fighting lawyers and paperwork and his own brother's cold indifference. He needed a win this morning, even a small one, even just the sight of Toby's sleepy eyes blinking up at him over a bowl of cereal. Marcus pushed himself up from the chair and walked down the hall, his boots heavy on the old wood floor. He knocked once on Toby's door, soft, not wanting to startle him. "Hey, buddy, you up?" No answer. Marcus figured the kid was still asleep, dead to the world the way kids his age could be, and he almost turned around right then. But something made him push the door open anyway. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was 20 years of reading rooms in a life where reading rooms wrong could get you hurt. The bed was empty. The blanket was thrown back, rumpled and cold. And the window, the one that looked out over the side lot where the bikes were parked, stood open a few inches, the curtain shifting slightly in the morning breeze. Marcus stood there for a second, his mind refusing to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. Toby? Nothing. Just the quiet creak of the old clubhouse settling and the distant call of a bird outside. He crossed the room in 3 strides and looked out the window, half expecting to see the boy sitting right there on the ground, maybe just needing some air. But there was nothing, no small shape, no sign of him at all, except for a faint smudge in the dirt below the window where somebody light and quick had landed and taken off running. The backpack. Marcus's eyes shot to the corner where it usually sat, the one Toby never let out of his sight. Gone, his stomach dropped like he'd missed a step going downstairs in the dark. He'd seen this before. Not this exact moment, but the shape of it, the same way Toby had described running from the shelter, running from anyone who might send him somewhere he didn't want to go. Marcus knew fear when he saw its aftermath, and this was fear, plain as day, written all over that empty bed and that open window. Damn it. The word came out low, and Marcus was already moving before he finished saying it. Back down the hall, boots pounding now instead of walking. Diesel. Preacher. His voice cut through the quiet clubhouse like a gunshot. Everybody up, now. Doors banged open. Feet hit the floor. Within seconds, the hallway was full of big men in various stages of undress, blinking sleep out of their eyes, sensing something was wrong before Marcus even said a word. "Toby's gone," Marcus said, and just saying it out loud made it feel more real, more terrifying. Windows open. Backpack's gone too. He heard something, or he's scared, I don't know which, but he ran. Diesel was already reaching for his boots. How long? I don't know. Could be 20 minutes. Could be an hour. Marcus raked a hand through his hair, forcing himself to think instead of panic. He's a kid on foot. He can't have gotten far. Preacher put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, steady as always even with worry etched into his weathered face. We'll find him, Marcus. Every single one of us. We're not stopping till we do. Word spread through the clubhouse like wildfire, brother telling brother, until every man who called that place home was pulling on jackets and grabbing keys. Bikes started roaring to life out in the lot, one after another, until the whole yard rumbled with the sound of engines ready to move. By the time the afternoon light began to soften and stretch long shadows across the pavement, dozens of bikers rolled out in every direction, splitting up to cover the town block by block. They checked alleys behind the grocery store, the playground equipment at the park where kids sometimes hid, the old drainage ditch by the highway, anywhere a scared, running boy might think to disappear. Marcus rode until the streetlights blinked on, one by one, up and down Main Street. His hands ached from gripping the handlebars too tight, his eyes burned from scanning every alley and doorway, and still, nothing. No sign of a small boy with a backpack. No sign of Toby. His phone buzzed in his pocket every few minutes. Diesel checking the school. Doc checking the bus station. Preacher checking the shelter where Toby used to sleep, the one they never wanted him to remember. Every message said the same thing. Nothing yet. Marcus pulled over at a red light that didn't matter because the streets were empty, and he sat there, engine idling beneath him, feeling something close to despair creeping up his spine. He thought about Richard's lawyers, about the phone call Toby must have overheard, about the fear that must have gripped that small chest when he heard the word unfit thrown around like it was nothing. Marcus had been called worse things in his life. But Toby didn't know that yet. Toby didn't know that words like that couldn't touch what they'd built together. Not really. All Toby knew was that once before, a home had been taken from him. And now it sounded like it might happen again. The light turned green. Marcus didn't move. He closed his eyes, trying to think the way Toby would think, trying to feel the fear a 10-year-old boy would feel in the dark, alone, with nowhere safe to land. Where would he go? Not to strangers, not to the police, not after everything. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that felt like his. And then it hit him, sudden and sharp, like a fist closing around his heart. Emmy, Toby had mentioned it once, weeks ago, quiet and offhand, the way kids sometimes let the biggest things slip out sideways. I go see her sometimes. When I need to think. Marcus hadn't pressed him on it then. He'd let it go, figuring the boy would talk about it when he was ready. Now he wished he'd asked more. Wished he'd found out exactly where. But he knew the town. He knew there was only one cemetery small enough, close enough, for a boy on foot to reach. St. Anne's, out past the edge of town, where the old municipal plots sat beneath a stand of tired oak trees. Marcus gunned the throttle so hard the back tire chirped against the pavement. He radioed Diesel on the way, voice tight. St. Anne's Cemetery. I think I know where he is. On my way, Diesel said. No hesitation. No, Marcus said. Stay put. Let me go alone first. If I'm wrong, I need you all still looking. The ride out to St. Anne's felt longer than it should have, the road stretching thin and dark under a sky gone the color of a fading bruise, purple and blue and finally black. Marcus's headlight cut a narrow path through the dusk, throwing long shadows across the fence line as he turned onto the gravel road that led to the cemetery gates. He cut the engine at the entrance and let the silence settle around him. Thick and heavy. The gate was old, wrought iron, the kind that groaned when it opened, and Marcus pushed it wide, boots crunching over gravel then soft grass as he made his way in. It was harder than he expected, in the dark weaving between headstones, squinting at names he couldn't quite read. But then, near the back corner where the oldest oak leaned, crooked over a scatter of small graves, he saw it. A small shape, huddled and still, sitting against a modest gray headstone. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He walked closer, slow now, careful, the way he might approach a spooked animal. And there was Toby, knees drawn up to his chest, arms wrapped tight around the backpack, shivering in the cold night air. His face was streaked with dried tears, his lips faintly blue, but he was breathing. He was alive. He was here. The headstone read Emmy Rose, beloved daughter and sister, the letters barely visible in the gathering dark. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't reach for the boy, didn't try to scoop him up and carry him home like some kind of rescue mission. Instead, he lowered himself down onto the cold ground beside Toby, his knees popping in protest, and sat there, shoulder almost touching shoulder, letting the quiet stretch between them. The night settled around them both, dark and still, broken only by the distant hum of crickets and the boy's uneven breathing beside him. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The crickets kept singing in the grass. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Marcus watched his breath fog in the cold air. He waited. He had learned that much these past few weeks, that Toby's words came easier when nobody was chasing after them. Finally, Toby sniffed. "You're not mad?" "No," Marcus said. "Scared, real scared. Not mad." Toby's chin trembled. He kept his eyes fixed on the gray stone in front of them, on the carved letters that spelled his sister's name. "I heard your brother's guys talking on the phone. They said you weren't fit. They said they were going to take me away." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice soft. "That's not going to happen, Toby. You don't know that." Toby's voice cracked. "Everybody says that. Mom said we'd be okay too. She said it right before they came and put our stuff on the curb." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "I thought if I ran, at least nobody could tell me no. Nobody could take anything away if I already left first." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the cold. He thought about all the nights this boy must have spent teaching himself that lesson, that leaving before you could be left was somehow safer. It wasn't a lesson any 10-year-old should have learned. But there it was, plain as day, sitting in the dark beside a headstone. "I came out here because of her," Toby said quietly, nodding toward the grave. "She'd know what to do. She always knew what to do, even when she was sick. Even at the end." Marcus swallowed hard. "You want to tell me about her?" "Whenever you're ready." Toby didn't answer right away. He looked down at the backpack in his lap, the same one he'd carried through every cold night, every shelter floor, every mile of running. His fingers found the zipper, and for the first time since Marcus had found him trembling under that porch, he didn't pull it tight against his chest. He started to open it. Marcus held his breath. He didn't move, didn't reach out, didn't do anything that might make the boy change his mind. Toby's small hands were shaking as he reached inside. Marcus expected toys, maybe a stuffed animal. something a kid would clutch like a life raft. Instead, Toby pulled out a stack of folded papers, bound together with a rubber band gone brittle with age, the edges soft and worn from being handled again and again. "These are Emmy's," Toby whispered. "She wrote 'em. Before she died." He held the stack out, and Marcus took it as gently as he'd ever taken anything in his life, like it might crumble to dust in his hands. In the dim moonlight, he could just make out the careful, looping handwriting of a child, uneven in places, like she'd written some of them lying down, too weak to sit up. "Dear Toby," the first one began. "I know I'm sick. I heard Mom crying on the phone, and I know what the doctor said even though nobody told me straight. I'm not scared though. I just want you to have something good to remember, so I'm saving up." Marcus's hands went still. He turned to the next letter, and the next, each one dated, each one in that same fragile handwriting. Emmy writing about the quarters she'd found under the couch cushions. Emmy writing about the $1 she'd earned helping a neighbor carry groceries. Emmy writing, in the last letter, just 11 days before the date on the stone. "Almost enough for your birthday present. I know what I want to get you. It's a surprise. I hope I get to see your face when you open it." Marcus's throat closed up so tight he couldn't speak. He looked over at Toby, who was watching him now, waiting, like he needed to know if this would finally be the moment somebody understood. "She never got to give it to me," Toby said, so quiet it was almost lost in the wind moving through the oak above them. "I don't even know what it was. I just know she was thinking about me. Right up until the end. She was thinking about me instead of herself." Marcus didn't sleep much that night. He sat in the chair by Toby's bed until the sky outside turned gray, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. Steady and calm for the first time in weeks. Toby had fallen asleep with the backpack close, but not clutched tight anymore. Just close. Like a memory instead of a shield. Around 6, Marcus got up quiet as he could and made a pot of coffee in the clubhouse kitchen. Diesel was already up, leaning against the counter in his undershirt, eyes heavy with sleep. "He okay?" Diesel asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. "He's okay." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Diesel just nodded and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder before shuffling off toward the garage. Marcus went to the small office at the back of the clubhouse, the one with the ancient copy machine that jammed if you looked at it wrong. He laid Emmy's letters out flat on the glass, one by one, careful as a man handling something holy. He made copies of every single one. He did not read them again. He'd read them enough times in the dark last night that the words were burned behind his eyes already. He didn't think he'd ever stop seeing them. By 7:30 he was on his bike, the copies tucked safe inside his jacket, zipped tight against the wind. He told Toby he'd be back before lunch. He told him 3 times, actually, until Toby finally cracked a small smile and said, "I believe you, Marcus. Go." The drive to Richard's office took 40 minutes. Marcus used every one of them to get his anger under control, because this wasn't about anger anymore. Anger was too small for what he was carrying. This was something heavier. Richard's office sat on the 3rd floor of a building he owned downtown, glass and steel, nothing like the gravel and grease Marcus called home. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset, tried to tell him Mr. Kelly was in a meeting. "He'll see me," Marcus said, and walked past her before she could stop him. Richard looked up from his desk, already annoyed, already halfway to standing. "Marcus, I don't have time for this. If this is about the lawyers, My attorney already told your attorney. Sit down, Marcus said. Something in his voice made Richard pause. Maybe it was the flatness of it. Maybe it was the fact that Marcus wasn't raising his voice at all, wasn't puffing up the way he had the last time they'd stood in this office. He looked tired. He looked like a man who'd been up all night holding something too big for his hands. Richard sat. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded stack of copies. He set them on the desk, one at a time, lining them up like he was dealing cards. He didn't say a word. He just stepped back and waited. "What is this?" Richard asked. "Read it." Richard picked up the first page, his mouth already curling into that familiar, dismissive shape he always wore when he thought someone was wasting his time. But then his eyes moved down the page. Marcus watched his brother's face the way he'd watch weather rolling in, watching for the first change in the wind. Richard's mouth stopped moving. His eyebrows drew together. He set the first page down slowly and picked up the second. Then the third. The room went so quiet Marcus could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the tick of the clock on the wall, his own heartbeat in his ears. Richard's hand trembled slightly on the fourth page. Just slightly. A man who'd spent 30 years learning to keep his face still was losing that fight one letter at a time. He got to the last one. Marcus knew which words were on it. "Almost enough for your birthday present. I hope I get to see your face when you open it." Richard set the page down. He didn't pick up another. He just sat there, staring at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. Like he was trying to remember what work they'd done, what they'd signed, what they'd built. Marcus said nothing. He let the silence do what silence does. He watched 2 decades of hard edges begin, finally to come apart. Richard sat alone in his office for a long time after Marcus left. The papers stayed spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't stop looking at. Outside his window, the city kept moving, cars and people and noise, all of it going on like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something inside him had cracked open, and he didn't know how to close it back up. He picked up his phone with a hand that still wasn't quite steady. "Get me legal," he said when his assistant answered. Now, 10 minutes later, his lawyer's voice came through the speaker, already talking about strategy, about the hearing date, about the arguments they'd prepared against Marcus's fitness as a guardian. "Drop it," Richard said. There was a pause. "Drop what, exactly?" "All of it, the challenge. The whole thing. I want it withdrawn today. I don't care what it costs. Richard, we've built a strong case." "The club affiliation alone," I said, "drop it." His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, and he cleared his throat. "File whatever you need to file. I want it done by end of day." He hung up before the lawyer could argue anymore. Then he sat there, looking at Emmy's handwriting one more time. Round, careful letters, like she'd practiced them to make sure Toby could read every word. A little girl, sick and scared, spending her last good days thinking about someone else's birthday. Richard closed his eyes. He thought about his own children, grown now, living their own lives, and how he couldn't remember the last time he'd written any of them a letter, let alone one that mattered like this. He grabbed his car keys. The drive to the clubhouse took almost an hour, most of it spent gripping the steering wheel too tight, rehearsing words that kept falling apart in his head. He hadn't been to that gravel lot in 20 years, not since the funeral. Not since the day he and Marcus had stood over their father's grave and said things to each other that couldn't be taken back. He remembered the way Marcus had looked at him that day, like he was looking at a stranger wearing his brother's face. When Richard pulled up, the sight of the place hit him harder than he expected. Motorcycles lined up in neat rows. A boy's bicycle leaned against the porch rail, small and out of place among all that chrome. He saw a kid's drawing taped in one of the windows, a crayon picture of a motorcycle with a stick figure riding it, a big smiling sun overhead. Marcus was standing in the yard when Richard got out of his car, arms crossed, watching him walk up the gravel path like he wasn't sure if this was real. "Richard, I withdrew it," Richard said. "The legal challenge. It's done. I called this morning." Marcus didn't say anything right away. He just studied his brother's face, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing Richard usually wanted in return. But there wasn't one. Richard looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and was still figuring out what to fill the space with. "Is he here?" Richard asked. "The boy." "Toby." Marcus hesitated, then nodded toward the clubhouse door. Toby came outside a few minutes later, cautious, standing close to Marcus's side. He didn't know this stranger, didn't know what to make of the well-dressed man standing in the gravel lot where bikers usually stood. Richard crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "Toby, my name is Richard. I own the building where you used to live." He watched the boy's face go tight, watched Marcus's hand settle protectively on Toby's shoulder. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I read your sister's letters. And I want to make things right, as much as I can." He told Toby about an apartment above one of his shops downtown. Small but warm, sunny in the mornings. Rent-free, forever. His to live in with Marcus for as long as he needed. He told him about a fund he was starting that day, in Emmy's name, to help families who were about to lose their homes, so no other kid would ever have to sleep in a car the way Toby had. Toby didn't say anything. He just looked up at Marcus, like he was checking if this was real. Marcus nodded. Richard stood up slowly, and for the first time in 20 years, the brothers looked at each other without anger between them. Marcus stepped forward first. Richard met him halfway, and the two men wrapped their arms around each other, stiff and unsure at first, then tighter, like something long broken was finally being put back together. 1 week later, the clubhouse lot looked different. Someone had strung up streamers between two motorcycles, and Preacher had set up a folding table covered in balloons that kept trying to float away in the wind. There was a cake, too, chocolate with white frosting, and written across the top in shaky red letters it said, "Happy Birthday, Toby." Toby stood by the table wearing his little leather vest, the one with the club patch stitched on the back. He'd grown used to it now, the weight of it on his shoulders, like it belonged there. But he still didn't understand why everyone kept smiling at him like they were hiding something. "All right," Marcus said, stepping up beside him. His voice was rough, the way it always was, but there was something soft underneath it today. "Diesel's got something for you." Diesel came around the side of the clubhouse, grinning so wide it looked like his face might crack. He was pushing something covered in an old blanket, wheels squeaking against the gravel. He stopped it right in front of Toby and stood back, hands on his hips, looking prouder than Toby had ever seen him. "Go on," Diesel said. "Pull it off." Toby looked at Marcus. Unsure, Marcus just nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching like he was trying not to smile too big. Toby grabbed the edge of the blanket and pulled. Underneath was a motorcycle. A real one, but small, built just for him, painted a deep, shining black, with a red flame stretching along the tank. The seat was low enough for his feet to touch the ground. The handlebars gleamed in the sun. It looked exactly like the big bikes parked around the lot, only sized down, made just for a boy his age. Toby's mouth fell open. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at it, like it might disappear if he blinked. "Diesel's been building it for weeks," Marcus said. "Out in the garage, after hours. Wanted it to be a surprise." Doc stepped up from the crowd, holding a folded piece of paper. "There's something else you should know, kid." He looked at Marcus, who gave a small nod, then Doc unfolded the paper carefully. It was one of Emmy's letters, the one they'd read a dozen times already, but Doc read the important part out loud again anyway. She wrote, "I've been saving my chore money. I want to get you a toy motorcycle for your birthday. I know it's silly, but I think you'd like it. I hope I get better soon so I can see your face when you open it." The lot went quiet. Even the wind seemed to settle for a moment. Toby's eyes filled up fast, and this time he didn't try to stop it. The tears came down his cheeks, but his mouth was doing something it hadn't done in a long time. It was smiling, wide and shaking, like his whole face didn't know what to do with all those feelings at once. "She wanted this," Toby said, his voice cracking. "She really wanted this for me." "She did," Marcus said, kneeling down beside him. "And I think she'd be pretty happy right now, seeing you get it." Toby wiped his face with his sleeve, then looked at the little motorcycle again like he was really seeing it for the first time. All that guilt he'd carried, the belief that he should have done something more, saved her somehow, protected her the way she'd tried to protect him with her secret savings, it started to loosen its grip on his chest. He didn't understand it all in that moment. He just felt lighter, like something heavy had finally been set down. Diesel helped him climb on, showing him where to put his feet, how to hold the handlebars steady. The engine was small, quiet compared to the roaring machines around it, but when it started up, Toby laughed out loud. A real laugh, bright and free. He rode it slow circles around the gravel lot, wobbling at first, then steadier, the wind pushing his hair back from his face. The whole club cheered, fists in the air, hollering his name. Diesel ran alongside him for a few steps, grinning. Preacher clapped along with Doc. Marcus stood back, arms crossed, watching the boy ride with a look on his face like he'd never been prouder of anything in his whole life. Toby rode past the cake, past the streamers, past every hard night that had brought him here, and for the first time since Emmy died, he let himself feel nothing but joy. Morning light came through the small window in soft gold stripes, falling across the bed where Toby lay still half asleep. This was his room now, really his. The walls had a few posters taped up, motorcycles mostly, and a shelf Doc had built him for his books. On the nightstand sat Emmy's backpack, empty of its old weight but never thrown away. Some things you keep even after the hurt turns into something softer. Toby sat up and rubbed his eyes. Today was the day. First day at his new school. He'd been dreaming about it and dreading it in equal parts all week, the kind of nervous that sits in your stomach like a stone. He reached for his vest first, the way he always did now. It hung on the bedpost every night, patch facing out, and every morning he put it on before anything else, even before his shoes. It fit a little better now than it used to. Doc said he was finally putting on some good weight. Diesel said he was getting taller, though Toby wasn't so sure about that. He slid the vest over his shoulders and stood in front of the small mirror propped against the wall. The patch caught the light. He still couldn't quite believe it was real, that he got to wear it, that he belonged to something like this. When he opened his door, Marcus was already there, leaning against the hallway wall with his arms crossed like he'd been standing there a while. "Morning," Marcus said. His voice was still rough and low, same as always, but his eyes were soft in a way that used to surprise Toby and now just felt normal. Felt right. "Morning," Toby said back. "You ready?" Toby's stomach did a little flip. "I don't know. What if nobody likes me?" Marcus crouched down so they were eye level, the way he'd done since that very first day under the porch. "They're gonna like you fine, and if they don't, you come tell me, and we'll figure it out. Together, that's how this works now." Toby nodded slowly. Somehow those words always helped, even when they didn't fix everything. Especially then. They walked out to the lot together, and Toby stopped in his tracks. The whole club was out there. All of them. Diesel stood by his big bike, grinning like it was Christmas morning. Preacher had his sunglasses pushed up on his head, nodding at Toby with that calm, steady look he always had. Doc gave him a thumbs up, and behind them, lined up in 2 long rows across the gravel, sat a dozen motorcycles, chrome gleaming, engines silent for now, but waiting. "What is all this?" Toby asked, though part of him already knew. "Figured your first day deserved an escort," Marcus said, walking him toward his own small bike. The one Diesel built him, parked right in the middle of the group. "Can't have you showing up alone. Not on a day like today." Toby climbed onto his bike, hands gripping the handlebars the way Diesel had taught him. His heart was pounding, but not with fear this time. This was something else, something that felt like pride. Marcus swung a leg over his own bike beside him and gave the nod. Engines roared to life all around them, one after another until the whole lot shook with the sound of it. It used to scare Toby, that sound, back when he first arrived, thin and hungry and jumping at every noise. Now it sounded like something else entirely. It sounded like home. They rode out of the lot together, the dozen bikes falling into formation around him, engines thundering down the road as the whole town seemed to stop and stare. Kids on the sidewalk pointed. A woman watering her garden shielded her eyes and smiled. Toby rode in the middle of it all, vest flapping slightly in the wind, feeling something in his chest that used to be fear and grief and now was just pure, simple joy. They pulled up outside the school, engines idling as Toby climbed off his bike. Other kids were staring, some of them whispering, some of them grinning. Toby turned back toward Marcus, who was still sitting on his bike, watching him with that same proud look from the birthday party. "Bye, Dad," Toby said. The word came out easy, natural, like it had always belonged there. Marcus's face changed, just for a second, something breaking open behind his eyes. He nodded, throat tight, and raised a hand in a wave as Toby turned and ran toward the school doors, the roar of a dozen engines rising behind him like thunder, like promise, like home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.